Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We are delighted to welcome Dr. Gachago as our speaker for this afternoon's webinar. He'll be presenting on the ethical use of AI in the healthcare setting, and we'll have time for questions and discussion at the end of his presentation. We have some few introduction and housekeeping slides, and Alison, take it over.
Okay. So on the next slide, this educational activity is a project of TexLa Telehealth Resource Center, a federally funded program with F. Marie Hall Rural and Community Health at TTU Agency, as well as Well Ahead, Louisiana, with generous support from our Health Resources and Services Administration, or HRSA. On the next slide, there are some helpful tips for our webinar. Please make sure everyone is muted, and please type any questions or comments you may have during this presentation into the chat box. Dr. Santos will now introduce our speaker.
All right. While we're waiting for Dr. Gachago to sign in, Dr. Jan Gachago is our... Oh, there you go. Thank you, Dr. Gachago.
I'm here.
Perfect. Yeah.
I'm here.
So I'm just introducing you, Dr. Gachago. By the
Okay.
way, I have with me Dr. George and our member of the student interest group, Allison, here. So Dr. Jan Gachago is the Executive Director of Telehealth at TTU Agency and responsible for the oversight and strategic management of TTU Agency's effort in the advancement of comprehensive telehealth. He is working to expand the impact of telehealth to improve the health of those TTU Agency serves, which while cultivating a learning and working environment that encourages research, education, training, and scholarship in telehealth. Dr. Gachago received a doctorate of healthcare administration from the University of Phoenix, a Master of Science in International Management from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and Bachelor of Arts in International Business Administration and French from the American International College. Very wonderful and impressive resume, by the way, Dr. Gachago. He is a current digital and technology advancement technology scholar and research fellow at NIH, the famous NIH. His past experience include his work on DigiHealth, a senior technology consultant for the International Finance Corporation, World Bank Group, and as co-founder and CEO of eHealth Solutions, of which the hybrid telemedicine mobile health app project has been recognized by Frost & Sullivan as the best mobile health telemedicine solution in customer value delivery in 2018. We are very honored and proud that we have Dr. Gachago as part of Texas Tech, and we will now give the podium to Dr. Gachago. Dr. Gachago.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Santos. I'm going to go ahead and try and share my screen, if you don't mind. Here we go. Share. Okay. I just want to make sure everybody's seeing what I'm seeing. Looks
yes,
great.
we do. Yeah.
Okay. Lovely. 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 All right. Okay. Just give me 1 second here. Oops. Let's see. All right. I thank you very much, everyone, this afternoon. Thank you for having me. It's such an honor and privilege to be before you this afternoon. And as was initially mentioned, essentially what I am going to be doing here is presenting on artificial intelligence ethics in healthcare. This is indeed quite a passion of mine, particularly because I had the opportunity to have oversight over one of the largest AI projects at the NIH called the AIM Ahead. And so my love for AI, you might say, was developed at the NIH. And certainly when you drill down, this is a subject that's near and dear to me. So essentially this afternoon, I'm going to go through some very specific content, and I would ask that maybe we hold off on the questions until towards the end. I'm going to try and do my best to keep it 45 minutes. But my disclaimer is, I'm sure everybody in this call knows, you can't talk about AI without talking about things like the strategic application of AI in healthcare. You can't talk about AI without talking about diving deeper into really machine learning and deep learning. And so I beg your pardon and ask that you would bear with me because I've done my very best to try and keep it at a relatively high level. But I think this is something that should be pretty much near and dear to all our hearts. And so for the purposes of our meeting this afternoon, I'm going to look at understanding AI, the AI impact on healthcare, AI ethics. We're going to look at the foundation of ethics in healthcare AI. We're going to look at 8 key ongoing ethical concerns with AI in healthcare. We're going to look at some examples of ethical violations. And then we're going to ask ourselves whether it's enough to simply be ethical, or whether we need to be truthful and lawful with AI. And then we'll go into a roadmap for developing an ethical AI ecosystem in healthcare. And finally, we'll close off with some additional resources and references on AI ethics in healthcare. And at that point, then I will welcome you to ask whatever questions you have. Right. So for starters, I think we can all agree on a sort of base understanding of what AI in healthcare is, right? And I think at a very sort of high level, we can all agree that it is indeed the ability of computer systems to perform cognitive tasks that we typically associate with the human mind. Now, reason why AI is probably so exciting to, at least to me and to many others, is because of the impact that it's making in healthcare. And to give just a few examples, we see areas such as the unification of mind and machine through brain interfaces. We see the ability to expand care to underserved or low and middle income country regions. We see the opportunity to reduce burdens of electronic health record use. We see the opportunity to create more precise analytics for pathology. We see opportunities to bring intelligence to medical devices and machines. We see it, AI giving us the opportunity to turn electronic health records into more reliable risk predictors. We see the possibility of converting selfies into diagnostic tools and certainly revolutionizing the clinical decision-making at the bedside. So when we think about it, essentially AI is giving us the opportunity to augment really the person-to-person nature of and enhance the capabilities of telehealth. And how does it do that? It does that through clinical evaluation, through areas such as telemonitoring, through quality improvement, and certainly through virtual assistance. And as we can see, with the convergence of AI and telehealth, certain legal and regulatory and ethical issues certainly develop by default, right? Such as protecting personal health information, disparities in health, professional liability malpractice, and certainly there are Food and Drug Administration implications. So what essentially are AI ethics? What is AI ethics all about? In a nutshell, I think we can all agree that it's about the moral principles and techniques intended to inform the development and responsible use of AI technology, right? And some of the questions that come along with that is, how do we address bias in AI? How do we address liability? How do we address security? How do we address the idea of human interaction? Do we stop chatting with each other? How do we address areas around employment, wealth inequality, power and control, and certainly robot rights? I mean, that is actually a thing these days, believe it or not, right? But why is ethical AI indispensable? It's certainly in response to the range of individual and society harms that the misuse, abuse, and certainly poor design and negative intended consequences of AI systems may cause, there is in fact a need to establish an ethical framework, right? So yes, we're excited about all the wonderful things that AI can do for us. And certainly there's tremendous potential around AI and certainly layering it over digital health tools, such as electronic health records, mobile disease management applications, in-home clinical virtual monitoring assistance, clinical trial data, application collection tools. There's such tremendous potential, but at the same time, we recognize that there are very significant societal harms that could come about as a result of the poor use, poor design, or unintended consequences related to AI. Now, that being said, when we talk about particularly AI in healthcare, there is a foundation of ethics that comes along with it, just by default of being applied in the healthcare setting. And I'm sure what I'm showing in front of you is not unfamiliar when we talk about sort of the Hippocratic Oath, areas such as the respect for autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, justice, explainability, and explainability being the new one, the new element, because of the development of AI, right? So we all know, yes, the Hippocratic Oath has these 4 elements to it, but again, by virtue of AI being introduced to the equation, we now want to, we now require healthcare providers to be able to explain how an AI tool helped them arrive at a clinical decision. Everything else, healthcare providers are very comfortable with. They're very comfortable with respect for autonomy, very comfortable with non-maleficence, very comfortable with beneficence, very comfortable with justice. But again, a wrinkle is thrown into the cart when you think about this whole idea related to explainability that comes about specifically as a result of artificial intelligence. So when we think about respect for autonomy, again, this is not new to anybody that's a healthcare professional on this conference call. Individuals essentially have the right to make their own decisions about whatever treatment they'll accept or they won't accept. And of course, you know, when the context is when essentially in the past, some healthcare providers took extreme measures doing what they decided was in the best interest of the patients. Very interesting case is the case of Madrigal versus Quillian. Essentially, this was a scenario where a bunch of Hispanic women had some decisions made on their behalf that were not to their benefit, essentially. And they claimed that, well, the decisions were made in English, yet their first language was Spanish. And so essentially, they ended up suing the physicians, right? So we have to think about balancing out the decision-making power between ourselves and what we delegate to AI, right? As such, we need to start thinking in terms of meta-autonomy or a decide to delegate type of model. And then, of course, when we talk about non-maleficence, which again, any healthcare professional on this echo call understands, it's really what we call the first do no harm principle that originates in the Hippocratic Oath, right? And really revolves around infringing on individual privacy, misuse of AI, and caution over the use of AI. So really the question we should be asking ourselves, should we be concerned about guarding against essentially Frankenstein or his monster's maleficence, right? And I hope that frame of reference is not lost on all of you. We should certainly think about protecting from harm that comes from human intent or unpredictable technology behavior. When we talk about beneficence, right, we really talk about promoting well-being, preservation, and dignity of and planetary sustenance. This whole notion, this whole thought process is really underscored by developing AI that is beneficial to human beings in various ways. The principle of doing as much good as you can as a healthcare professional is essentially underscored by acts of kindness, charity, and altruism. And of course, we all expect our healthcare professionals or providers to be compassionate, empathetic, and sensitive when it comes to bedside manner. Justice is the other element. What are we talking about? Essentially here, as we all know, fair distribution of healthcare resources, national global justice, and equal accessibility to AI benefits in this case, risks associated with bias in artificial intelligence models, right? And essentially the key here to leveraging justice from an AI perspective is using AI to rectify past injustices such as unfair discrimination, and certainly ensuring that the benefits of AI are either shared equitably or at least shareable, right? And finally, of course, making sure we can prevent any new damages from occurring. So this is what I consider the new element when it comes to the Hippocratic Oath, particularly when we're talking about the engagement or the utilization of AI. And what are we talking about when we talk about explainability? Essentially, we're talking about an ethical standard that comes from the unique nature of AI that revolves around establishing intelligibility and accountability. We need to be able to understand and establish accountability for the decision-making processes behind AI. Now, imagine for a second, as a healthcare provider, how you would do that with a patient. How would you explain that a result of AI augmenting your decision-making capacity as a clinical provider, you have arrived at a specific decision for your patient, right? Yet when you think about it, AI is actually pushing us in that direction. AI is saying, now you need to be able to explain how that model you leverage as far as clinical decision support got you to that point where you made a specific decision for a patient, right? And of course, it also demands the relationship between human beings and AI is readily understandable to the layman. Now, I think it's kind of important to think about some of the key ongoing ethical concerns with AI in healthcare, and because there are multiple concerns, but I think there's some key elements that serve as what I might call a brain tickle when it comes to thinking about AI overall from a larger perspective. How do we think about it? If I'm a practitioner or a healthcare professional and I'm asked to use a model, an AI model in my clinical decision-making, what should I keep at the forefront when it comes to AI? Well, certainly some of the ongoing ethical concerns include data issues, harm and prevention, issues such as the potential for AI misuse that could potentially limit the provision of healthcare, issues such as protection and respect of patient autonomy, the application of algorithms, right? And certainly longer term implications of using AI-based interventions. Now, let's talk about ethics related to data issues, harm and prevention. In this day and age, we use avatars and chatbots rather often. You go onto any sort of digital front door or onto an app, many cases you run into an avatar chatbot. Now, clearly, chatbots and avatars are capable of malfunction. How do we address that? We have therapeutic encounters where robots act in relative unpredictable ways and or they will malfunction. We've got data security of clinical applications which gather, process, and certainly communicate PHI or personal health information. How do we protect that? And then, of course, there's the element of hackability or unwanted elements looking into our personal healthcare data. How do we address that? Okay, so definitely something to think about. And then you've got the ethics related to development of interventions, AI interventions specifically, and their integration to practice and training. We can all agree that certainly given the newness of AI applications to healthcare, that causes existing frameworks or regulatory guidance to be relatively inadequate. At the same time, there's a certain significant gap that exists between the current ethical frameworks and the application of AI to healthcare that can only be resolved once some sort of harm has taken place. How do we address that? When we talk about establishing guidelines for AI applications, that may be a challenge. And yes, there are several organizations looking at developing some guidelines, such as the moral responsibility for computing artifacts, but there has not been to date one specific organization or one perhaps guideline that's been developed that has been accepted across the healthcare industry. And there's multiple organizations sort of working in that direction. In particular, I belong to the Coalition for Healthcare AI that has brought in various partners from industry, from academia, from the nonprofit world, from the government, and the goal is to develop some sort of guidelines that would be accepted industry-wide. But to date, we still don't have any specific guidelines. When you talk about the ethics related to the potential for AI misuse, certainly concerns exist, especially in mental health. And that concern primarily is around the idea that AI could potentially replace traditional services or traditional healthcare professionals. We also have an issue around blended care, where you have the combination between virtual visits and in-person care. So essentially, the issue is essentially receiving more attention based on the idea of benefiting from the best of both worlds, right? But is that exactly true? I mean, how much data do we have to support that? There's also the concern that AI applications to mental health can be used as an excuse to diminish the supply of traditional type of mental health care, particularly in low resource settings. How do we address that? What is the ethical resolution to issues such as this? And then, of course, you've got ethics related to supervision, referral and assessment of risk. In the absence of a supervising healthcare provider, it tends to be vague when an AI-driven chatbot or avatar would be able to refer individuals who are at higher risk. How do we deal with that? And then, of course, there's a dual challenge of how do you operationalize a duty of care, a code of practice for AI on reporting harm? How does AI actually assess that kind of harm? How does AI decide, okay, that's a situation that is not good, we need to change it? Or that's a situation an individual is going to be in a compromised position, let's address it. How would AI essentially interpret contextual factors related to harm in the same way a healthcare professional would, such as a psychiatrist? And then, of course, there's the ethics related to protection and respect of patient autonomy. Okay? There's two primary concerns here. How do you help patients understand how chatbots or avatars work so that they're clear that these are intelligent systems and not human beings? And while they have certainly demonstrated improved compliance amongst vulnerable populations, how do you remove or eliminate the risk of coercion and manipulation that comes with these very same tools? And then 6, there's the ethics around therapy being non-human, right? How do we address the idea of people sometimes being unable to assess users' emotional frame of mind in real time? I mean, AI cannot do that. A chatbot cannot do that, right? But a human being could certainly do that. And then in the absence of a mental health professional, web-based interventions are targeted at depression and anxiety. But then again, it eliminates a human element, a human interaction. So how effective would a tool like that be? You've got issues such as the risk of emotional and thought transference by patients to robots, particularly when those patients don't get to interact with a lot of people. They start to depend on these robots, and clearly robots do not have the ability to respond to emotional transference. So again, how do we address the ethics around these issues? There's the ethics that relate directly to the application of algorithms. Bias can be built into algorithms. AI has a potential to harbor biases. And certainly it's important that algorithms related to healthcare are transparent and open to analysis. So what does that mean? Does that mean as a healthcare provider, you need to have an AI expert standing next to you every day when you're leveraging AI tools in order for them to be able to analyze whatever AI model you're using? And then finally, there's a challenge of explaining how an algorithm works to those who are already mentally compromised. How do you do that? How do you get beyond that barrier? And then finally, we've got the ethics related to long-term implications of using AI-based interventions. Typically, these interventions can cause a sense of dependency that tends to address loneliness and emotional comfort. And then, of course, there is the risk of enhancing human to robot rather than human to human relations. Typically, if you talk to any healthcare professional, they would prefer the enhancement of the human to human relations rather than the human to robot. And then, of course, there are issues related to isolation that are associated with sexual dysfunction, particularly sex bots, which could potentially increase sex crimes as well, right? So as you can see, there are several ethical issues or several categories of ethical issues related to the application of AI in spite of its tremendous potential and its tremendous ability to augment the healthcare that we already deliver today. In fact, here, as we can see, is an example of an ethical violation. And this is essentially where this example basically showed how data led an algorithm to underestimate the healthcare needs of Black patients versus white patients, right? Another reason why we require an ethical framework for AI. Another example, which has to do with age disparities. This model basically was trained to detect COVID-19 using adult chest x-rays, but ended up giving false positives in children, right? So yes, we love AI, it can do a great deal, but these are issues that excuse me, and we clearly have to address. Another example is that of bias in the application of machine learning for mental health diagnosis and treatment. This was a scenario at IBM, where basically IBM used machine learning to predict diagnoses or treatment for postpartum depression. And so essentially, the diagnoses and the use of mental health services did not align with the known rates of the incidence of postpartum depression, right? Now, that's not to say these issues can't be corrected, but we certainly need to be cautious when it comes to leveraging AI tools and leveraging them effectively, and certainly leveraging them in an ethical fashion. And most recently, it's very interesting that companies such as OpenAI and IBM actually went to Congress and said, Congress, we want to be regulated. This is as recent as May 11th, 2023. And what you see in front of you is a picture of Samuel Altman, who's a CEO of OpenAI that developed ChatGPT. He, along with leaders from IBM, actually went to Congress and said, you know what? We don't want to break things and then down the road try to fix them. We want you to come up with a regulatory framework that would be applied to us. And we are willing to work with you to help develop that framework. But we are asking you to come to please establish some sort of regulations that we can certainly live by and make sure that whatever we develop certainly conforms to your regulations. I mean, this is actually a first. And you wonder whether maybe they learned from the likes of Facebook or Meta and suddenly decided, well, we better be more proactive about it. But this is clearly a first where the actual leading organizations in AI have gone to Congress and said, we need to be regulated, please. So one of the other things we have to think about is whether it's enough for AI to be ethical, whether it's enough for ethical AI to simply be moral. Now, if you've been around some of the proponents of ethical AI like I have been, they will tell you, no, ethical AI, it doesn't stop at being moral. We need to make sure that it's also trustworthy. We need to make sure that it's also lawful. And what do we mean by that? from a trustworthy perspective, will mean that AI respects our data and the insights about us and is transparent and explainable. From a lawful perspective, it means legally binding regulations relevant to the development, deployment, and use of AI systems today. So, like I said, we want trustworthy AI. It's not enough to stop it making sure that AI models are moral. So what are the key components of trustworthy AI? Clearly, it has to be lawful, has to be ethical, has to be robust. And how do we do that? How do we get it to that point? What are the things we have to do to develop AI that is in fact lawful? So clearly there's some key elements you need to have, and those include human agency and management, technical sturdiness and security, confidentiality and data control, openness, diversity, non-discrimination and fairness, public and ecological well-being, and certainly culpability. Who is responsible? There's always a question of who, because clearly none of that happens outside of a human being's power. So the roles that are certainly responsible for making sure that these executables happen within the context of making AI lawful are developers, deployers, end users, and certainly society in general. So when we talk about lawful AI, we again said previously that we talk about legally binding regulations relevant to the development of deployment and use of AI systems today, right? What do we need to do to develop lawful AI? What are the key ingredients that go into developing lawful AI? Well, first, it should be determined by regulatory, legal, and factual criteria. Secondly, these criteria should certainly reflect ethical, legislative, judicial, administrative, and ethical approaches towards assessment of medical algorithms in particular, and AI application outcomes in healthcare. And thirdly, these regulations should certainly be enshrined in local, country, and international legislation. And as you can see, some of the criteria that can be used to assess whether AI is lawful at all is certainly adoption by organizations such as the WHO or the NIH, national approval of the rules of the application of AI in healthcare, updating or ratifying annexes to the given regulations for the standard forms of contracts for the provision of consultative diagnostic, medical, and health services related to AI. And then, of course, active support is necessary, and research needs to be encouraged to focus on improving the assessment and the application of lawful AI in healthcare, right? So finally, we've got to ask ourselves, how do we actually build a roadmap for an ethical AI ecosystem? What should go into that roadmap? What is it that we should be doing in order to make sure that whatever AI presentations we develop, there is in fact a roadmap that gets us to that point where it is in fact ethical? Well, there's 4 areas that we need to be thinking about. And those 4 areas involve evaluation of models, the creation of models, financial investment in AI models, and for all intents and purposes, advocacy for ethics in AI on a consistent, diligent basis. So some of the key drivers for this roadmap, I mean, yes, we know these 4 pockets are very important, but behind those 4 pockets, there needs to be some key elements, the key levers that are driving these 4 elements in the direction of success with ethical AI. And those 3 levers are essentially collaborative engagement of a wide variety of stakeholders, the application of a variety of cultural frameworks, and certainly taking a living document or living process approach with consistent review for enhancement of the AI models we develop in healthcare. Now, when we talk about evaluation, which is that first pocket, or first bucket, we certainly need to be able to have legal organizations develop capacity to deal with AI issues or challenges, right? We also need specific tasks and decision-making responsibilities that should and should not be put in the hands of AI. So we really need to decide whether certain things should be AI-driven or not, okay, and make that clear distinction. We need to, from an evaluation perspective, determine whether existing legal frameworks are sufficiently founded on ethics, and if they can actually evolve with the ever-changing AI developments, right? And then in the second bucket, or the second pocket, which is creation, some of the key executables involve developing frameworks to improve the explicability or explainability of AI systems, auditing tools that would enable AI to quickly identify undesirable consequences such as unfair bias and other risks, specific measures or key performance indicators for trustworthiness in products and services. Okay, I think certainly in North America, we need an observatory for AI with certainly the mission to watch AI developments, encourage discussion forums, and be a resource for AI. Just to name a few of these key executables under the mission or under the bucket of creation. The third area is, of course, financial investments. You can't do things if resources are not invested in these types of endeavors. You have to have financial investment. So clearly, in this case, we need development of the use of AI technologies that are socially preferable, environmentally friendly, ethically sound, and indeed for the national good. Secondly, we need a consistent, diligent effort to advance the development of AI specifically for social good. We require interdisciplinary and certainly intersectoral cooperation and the discussion at the crossroads of ethics, technology, and legal studies and social issues, okay? And then within the advocacy bucket, certainly the key executables would be development of self-regulatory codes of conduct for data science professionals. We need corporate boards and C-suite leadership suites taking responsibility for the ethical consequences of their organizations as AI, their specific organizations' AI assets. And thirdly, we need the creation of educational curricula and public awareness campaigns relative to AI's ethical, legal, and social and societal impact. That being said, I have included in this presentation some additional resources on AI ethics. And at the same time, I have also included some, some references, if in fact you'd like a copy of the slides. And at this point, I want to say thank you very much for your time. Should you have any questions about this presentation, do feel free to email me at john.gachago@ttuhsc.edu, and I'll be more than happy to respond to your questions. And now I will actually open the floor to questions. I see we're actually 6 minutes ahead of schedule. So hopefully, Dr. Santos, that is what you were expecting.
It is a very wonderful talk, very thought-provoking, Dr. Gachago. I really enjoyed the talk, and I have so many questions. Your talk made me excited because I knew the potentials of AI in being a doctor and the providing of healthcare as well. However, it scares me a little bit too. What is in store for us? Definitely a frontier in healthcare. I have several questions, and we will give the time for the audience to ask questions as well. But I'm kind of worried about the medical legal culpability. If something's wrong with the patients, I'm kind of worried, Dr. George. Is it my fault or is it the AI fault? So I think that's one question. And of course, we want an ethical, a trustworthy, and lawful AI. And the other thing, though, is I think I agree a little bit with Sam Altman to have a regulation on this, because we don't want to be running wild, with the AI as well. So who is responsible? Is it the FDA? Is it the NIH? It should be a new body for this. By the way, New England Journal of Medicine is just preparing a new journal for next year called AI, New England Journal of Medicine. So this is really big and timely. The other thing though is cybersecurity. Like I have my data, I don't want to be involved with this, with the data collection and machine learning on my data. How would I know that they are not using my data? So that's another thing regarding with the conflict of interest, regarding the other thing though is what about metrics and quality improvement? This is not perfect. Just so recently, there's a publication regarding GPT failing actually the American Society of Gastroenterology examination. So how are we trustworthy that they will take care of our health? So those are some of my questions, Dr. Gachago, and thank you very much.
And thank you very much for that question, Dr. Santos. And I would like to tell you there's a specific answer to that, and unfortunately, I cannot do that. And I'll tell you why. Besides having worked on pretty much a national AI project for the NIH and having come to Texas Tech and still being involved in the Coalition for Healthcare AI, we in the Coalition for Healthcare AI, otherwise called CHAI, we are trying to rally the troops. We are trying to get representation from different areas of the AI spectrum, the AI ecosystem, to say, we need some specific guidance. We need some specific regulations. We need to come up with standards. And believe it or not, in addition to that, I'm also part of the HL7 Standards Development Organization AI team. And we are doing the very same thing. So CHAI and HL7, Reducer Coalition, Burden Group, and AI are all kind of working parallel to one another to develop these standards that would address those specific questions, meaning if I leverage an AI tool, who's responsible for it? Is it the AI developer or is it myself as a physician? We still don't have an answer to that, honestly. There is no, and every organizations around the world are still working on this particular, it's what I call the AI conundrum. And the reason why I have this slide up here is May 11th. I mean, it's amazing if you think about it, that these leading developers of AI, OpenAI, which is ChatGPT essentially, IBM, which is actually doing a lot of research around AI and quantum computing. These companies are coming to Congress. This is an unprecedented move where they're coming to Congress and saying, please regulate us. Please help us with this. And that's because nobody has come up with a specific standard. There's general guidelines, of course, about it shouldn't cause harm. There's the whole Hippocratic Oath, explainability because of the black box element of AI. But I can't imagine seeing you, Dr. Santos, doing surgery on a patient and saying, the algorithm that I use says that I should cut you left, cut you right. And guess what? I should pull out your kidney and place it on the side and then leave it on there for 1 minute and put it back in and you'll be fine. I can't see you doing that. That's not your job. Right? So unfortunately, there is no single answer to that, Dr. Santos, and anybody else who was going to ask the same thing.
I agree with you. That's evolving. Dr. Phillips have a question. Dr. Phillips, you want to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Good afternoon, Dr. Gachago. How are you?
Very well. How are you, Dr. Phillips?
Very good. Thank you for an excellent presentation. My question has to do with an observatory. You mentioned that a bit ago.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could tell us a little more about what that might be. Is that an academic entity or a regulatory entity? Or is it sponsored by a coalition of industry? How would that work?
So right now there's talk about developing a lab, developing like this observatory that would be a coalition of different parts of industry. For example, the Coalition for Healthcare AI is thinking about this whole idea of, like, again, there's members from the nonprofit industry, there's members from small business, there's members from government, there's members from pharma, there's members from the government. And the idea behind all of these is to come together and actually establish this kind of an observatory. In fact, more than that, actually is more like they're thinking about the idea of developing a lab where anybody that develops an AI model would be able to say, okay, I'm bringing my model to you as quote unquote the observatory or the lab, and you tell me whether my model works. You give me the thumbs up. So in other words, somewhat like an FDA for AI models in healthcare. I hope that answers your question.
Yes.
Awesome. Dr. Gachago, we have a lot of questions, and there's a comment from Lamicha Hogan about the copy of resources. We will send you a copy. Just send us your email.
Yes.
There's a question from Larry Llewellyn asking, what about the possibility and likelihood of bad actors inserting malware into the AI for the profit or damage or simple glee, resulting in bad AI decision?
You're absolutely, that is indeed a possibility. And that's why it could not be more urgent to actually get a good representation of stakeholders to develop this observatory or this lab environment that would allow for models to be able to go through there so they can be tested, they can be tested in sort of a safe environment. And we can look at how the models behave. But you're absolutely right, and definitely a good question. There is always bad actors that would want to leverage AI for their own evil ends. And so clearly that is why it's more urgent than ever for us to concentrate. And I believe, honestly, we don't have to, even an institution like TTU Agency can take the lead in developing an AI lab. I know certainly as an institute, we're also thinking about that. We're thinking about having a place in Texas where anybody that develops an AI model, particularly for healthcare, can bring their model to our lab and have us just verify that it actually works like it's supposed to, whether it's pre-deployment and post-deployment, and certainly continue monitoring that kind of a model while it's out being used by various organizations. So yes, good question and absolutely right.
Dr. Gachago, I agree with you, and I envision, our telehealth institute will be the America's test kitchen for other telemedicine products, platforms, including AI. There's a question for Dr. Chemitiganti. Then after this, we'll give the floor to Ms. Hogan. How do we, as a healthcare leader, champion appropriate use of AI to help us improve patient access and outcome? And second question: are the EVs like TexLa in AI healthcare?
Thank you for that question, Dr. Chemitiganti. When I think about how we as healthcare leaders champion appropriate use of healthcare, I'm actually going to go back to, I'm just going to go back to one of my slides here. One of the clear ways is to make sure that healthcare AI is not only ethical, but it's trustworthy and it's lawful. Secondly, it's really about being proactive about what we do to make sure that actually happens. We really need to take a sober approach towards AI, particularly healthcare AI. If you're using AI for some administrative task, chances are you can't really do that much damage, or the damage can usually be fixed. But when you're talking about human beings, chances are the damage is not something you can come back from. So I think as healthcare professionals, I think as people with a decent moral compass, we need to be asking questions of all these AI models that come our way. We need to be asking these questions about them being ethical, being trustworthy, being lawful. We need to be keeping at the forefront those 8 pillars that I mentioned earlier that tend to drive AI right now, or tend to be some major concerns. These 8 key ongoing ethical concerns: data issues and harm and prevention. If somebody brought me an AI model and said, I would like you to use this model in your practice, I'd probably respond to them and say, tell me how you deal with data issues and harm prevention. Tell me how your AI integrates into my practice and training, and what's the training on it. Tell me what the potential is for misuse of your AI model. Tell me about essentially how it protects and respects patient autonomy. Tell me about, whether you've tested your algorithm for bias. Tell me about what kind of longer implications you have on using AI based interventions, and whether my patients will be dependent on it or whether I would depend on it. Do you have studies? Do you have any peer-reviewed data that shows me that information? So that is what I would certainly recommend. And I think you asked a second question.
Yes, Dr. Gachago.
Yes.
So stepping back from healthcare, do you see like the electronic vehicles like Tesla are an appropriate model that people start imagining using AI in healthcare?
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's a good start to start thinking about AI. But using an automobile, I think, is a little different than applying it to a human being. And the only reason I know this, I have a very good friend in Florida who's responsible for the EV use of public transport. And a very interesting thing happened not too long ago, about maybe a year ago, is one of these buses, which he had worked on and developed in
taxis.
Essentially what happened is it did not recognize one point where it had to stop, right? But of course, luckily, the other drivers recognized they needed to stop, right? So that was a potential accident. But again, the damage would have been mostly to the vehicle itself, not necessarily to human beings, because there's no human beings in it at the time, except EL cars. So yes, it's a good, they definitely are an apt example of AI, but would I say AI in healthcare? Not really.
Thank you, Dr. Chemitiganti. Dr. Hogan, I apologize. Dr. Hogan, unmute yourself and ask the question. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. My name is,
Yes.
sorry. My name is Lamika Hogan. It's nice to meet you. Hi, Dr. Gachago.
Nice to meet you.
I'm with the School of Nursing, and my programs fall under the nurse practitioner programs. And I'm really interested in looking at how do we teach nurses appropriately about AI? Where does one go get trained to learn about AI? How do you know that those sources are reputable in that training? Those are some big questions that I have, because a lot of this is thrown at us through not just our curriculum, things that we're looking at from an academic perspective, but when somebody says, hey, I'm interested in AI, where would I point them? Where would I lead them to go find the most reputable training or resources?
I will tell you, just based on what I've seen and what I've engaged in, you've got great resources at places like Stanford University, Harvard, MIT, Johns Hopkins, the University of Miami, the University of Florida. They have some really, really good resources when it comes to really learning about AI and really going from the inception, the whole idea of what do I want to do with AI, to actually developing models around those kinds of goals, right? And I think that's the best kind of learning you can get. So those are some of the institutions that I would recommend that I know of head that are really good resources, and particularly if you want to learn about the application of AI to healthcare.
Okay, great. Thank you. I know that I may have some interested faculty at some point.
Sure.
And I appreciate the information. Thank you for the resources.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And I can send you a bunch more too.
Dr. Gachago, I have an additional question because, in the article at New England Journal of Medicine, they said that, AI could interpret images, radiographic images. They actually could read slides. They actually could look at the ophthalmologic examination.
Yes.
So could this be the end of our radiologists, of our pathologists, of our ophthalmologists? So I just want to make sure that, they're, of course, people who had vested interest on their specialties kind of worried about this AI as well.
So I'll answer this in one of two ways, actually in two ways. One, as long as regulations require the participation of a radiologist, okay, or an ophthalmologist, okay, AI will never take a radiologist or ophthalmologist place, because still there is an ophthalmology, radiology is not just a science, it's certainly an art to it, right? And a machine does not necessarily have that capacity to apply the artistic side, or quote unquote, what has come out of experience to images. So I really don't see that happening at all. All I see it is augmenting what ophthalmologists and radiologists do. Now, on the other hand, having worked in places in overseas, in countries where, you know, the ratio of a doctor to patients is like 1 to 70,000, right? There are certainly opportunities for ophthalmology to do glaucoma exams, right? Using a mobile phone. And I've seen it happen in other parts of the world, right? And then have that image be used to specify a diagnosis, right? Because that area, those areas don't have the healthcare professionals that we may have in the United States. So in those places, it's not necessarily even a replacement of the ophthalmologist or the radiologist. It's really having something other than nothing, okay? So you kind of have to balance it. Low and middle income countries, yes, you need some digital tools because you won't have the specialist. In countries that are mature in terms of regulation, in terms of AI maturity, or, you know, digital health maturity, they understand certainly the value of ophthalmologists and radiologists, and therefore I don't see that going away anytime soon.
That's good to know and reassuring, Dr. Gachago. But the other thing, though, is, you know, in connection with your answer, will the LMIC or low and middle income countries could afford this technology?
Yes, yes. Oh, it's being done. It's a very real thing. There's actually ophthalmological tools are being attached to cell phones, where you have a community health worker going from village to village and doing eye exams and capturing that eye image that allows them to specify diagnoses, right? Even diabetic patients are being tested that way. So when you talk about these complications that come from type 2 diabetes related to your eye, clearly in low middle income countries, you just don't have the specialists available. So that's the only available tool. So yes, it is happening. Yes, they're being diagnosed accurately in the most part. I'm sure there's 1 or 2 that are being missed, but it's certainly better than having nothing.
We have another question in the chat box, Dr. George.
Yes.
It's Larry.
Yeah, from Larry.
Larry Llewellyn, she said,
Larry.
asked if are we losing the distinction here between static algorithms and true artificial intelligence, in which the algorithm is continuously modified by the application, albeit compared with the new data, including the accurate or inaccurate prediction results?
So I think you're pointing to deep learning, Larry, it sounds like. And, you know, I think we still have a way to go with deep learning, but when you think about sort of the maturity curve of AI, by the way, let me just say, you know, we hear a lot of people saying AI machine learning. All machine learning, all deep learning is AI. So AI is the umbrella term. And really, deep learning is, you might say, is the more mature form of machine learning. So, I'm sorry? Oh, sorry. So when you think about that, I think we have a way to go as far as deep learning is concerned, but there are certainly some organizations or some applications that are making some significant progress where that is concerned. So are we losing the distinction between static algorithms and true artificial intelligence? No, I think we're talking a lot about the machine learning end of things, not as much about deep learning. Not that deep learning activities aren't underway. There are definitely a lot of deep learning activities underway. But the focus, on the most part, majority of applications fall within the machine learning sort of static algorithm area. And that's where, of course, a lot of the data is coming out of.
All right, we're nearing our end, Dr. Gachago. This is an excellent presentation. The only thing, though, I would like to add, because this is machine learning, they learn from the cases and whatnot. I think we need more diversity in the population,
Absolutely.
because sometimes there is misrepresentation, or there is a underrepresentation of minorities, in these aspects, and so sometimes this is not applicable. It's only applicable to white males sometimes, and so it's not applicable to minorities. Anyway, thank you very much. Any other questions from the floor, Dr. George?
I had a question. So, for example, when patients are doing dialysis, I'm a nephrologist,
Yes.
and they're doing dialysis at home. So how can an artificial intelligence, like, for example, if they have a problem with their machine, to troubleshoot and say, okay, well, this is, this could be a problem, and, help them troubleshoot. Have we come to a point that we could do such a thing with an artificial intelligence?
I'll answer this way. If you as a physician cannot troubleshoot a model, if you still cannot explain the way a model works to a patient, I doubt very much it's going to be possible for a patient to troubleshoot an AI model.
That's a nice way to answer it. I really liked it.
I just think it'll be very difficult, and we're still not there yet. We're still not there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. Dr. Gachago, thank you again for the wonderful talk. We would like to present to you this challenge coin for the wonderful webinar, for your pioneering work here at Texas Tech and in the telemedicine ecosystem and realm. And thank you again, Dr. Gachago. We look forward for future more opportunities of working together. I'm pretty sure you'll just be there in your office there in the second floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was an honor. And if you have any questions, if I can send you more data, please don't hesitate to reach out.
And I think we will have a Project Echo on June 8th, and it's about Alzheimer's. So watch out for the flyers and invitations. Thank you very much, everyone. Good afternoon.